joining us from around the world this morning or this afternoon, or in some cases this evening. This is the third in a series of 4 complimentary Sophia Talks with Professor Andrew Samuels. I'm Loralee Scott, and I'm thrilled and delighted to be here with each of you and to be here with, in particular, with Andrew. This morning, so Andrew, welcome. This morning, we're going to get right into this conversation, and we're going to start, Andrew, by your selection of art. So for those of you who may not know this, one of the things Andrew and I have done is make a commitment to sharing a particular piece of art at the beginning of these conversations that is in some way reflective of the theme. So Andrew chose a selection of art, a piece, an incredible, iconic piece by Pina Bausch. Andrew, can you share a little bit about why you chose that piece?
Most people think that relationships are the summit of authenticity and genuineness. Pina Bausch knew differently. Relationships are riddled with, permeated by performance and performativity. And what you see in this piece are the rituals that lie behind the ingredients of love and the ingredients of rejection and loss as well. I have never seen a more honest expression of the ambivalence that is characteristic of human relationships. And that's why I chose it.
Thank you. Yeah, Pina's work is impactful, powerful. She was ahead of her time. Thank you. So the title for this conversation, the theme for this conversation, your title is New Models of Relationship and Sexuality, Viral Intimacy in the West. Help us understand what you're referring to with this title, and why do you think we need new models of relationship?
COVID-19 hasn't invented or created anything new, but it has exaggerated and brought out important themes and important problems that were already there. Now, we can talk about this in relation to race and ethnicity. We can talk about this in relation to political leadership. We can talk about this in relation to social and economic inequality, and of course, gender oppression and inequality as well. So don't misunderstand me, especially in the United States. COVID-19 has acted as a kind of psychoanalyst for the West. And I stress the West because I do not know how this applies in non-Western societies. But in the West, I include, for example, Brazil and other places. Everything that we have worried about in connection with relationships, but at the margins of the discourse of relationship, has been thrust into our faces, which is, of course, what happens in analysis.
Fascinating. Okay, so, and COVID's been referred to as the great revealer, as we've talked about before, but one of the things that that can exist at times on the margins that I think COVID is revealing and putting into the center of our attention is relative to intimate partner violence as a result of COVID lockdowns. I'm sure many of you have experienced that in your practices. We've read about it. The United Nations in April called for urgent action to combat a global surge in domestic violence. Andrew, why do you think we're not seeing any progress being made in reducing this global pandemic?
Well, of course, the problem of male violence, I don't like the phrase domestic violence. Mm-hmm. It's mostly male violence against women and children that we're talking about here. This problem has been incorrigible for decades. So again, it's not something new, but of course the lockdown and the kind of enclosed, intimate situations that people are in has led to more. And I want to say something about this from my practice. I have 3 patients whom you would never have believed would bring to therapy issues of violence in their homes. So it has moved from being something that we might like to think is part of mental illness uh, in men or something like that. It's moved to being something that affects everyone. Now, let's be careful here. It's exactly the same with sexual abuse. Suddenly, when sexual abuse moved to the foreground of attention, it became clear that respectable people do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may well be, and I'm thinking about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, which is all the rage in London at the moment. It may well be that respectable people have always done it. I don't know. But right now, from my practice, and I've talked to one or two chums, this is going on in places where it would not go on before. But the problem of male violence against women rests on what's happening in lockdown homes in terms of the division of labor between men and women when there is a male parent and a female parent there. And I'd be happy to talk about that if that's what you'd like.
Well, I think just a couple, and I don't want us to get, we could do and we need to do an entire session just on this topic. But yeah, if you want to say a little bit about that, I do want to say with respect to what you just said, that I think this is where you would see a gender divide in terms of perspective. It's no secret to women that this has gone on at all echelons, socioeconomic, and for that's not a surprise or a revelation.
You're right.
I think it's a
No,
lived reality.
you're absolutely right. But the thing I wanted to move on to
Mm-hmm.
is what they're calling here the return to the 1950s in home. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, Loralee, but basically what's happening is that childcare and homeschooling is being done to an extraordinarily disproportionate extent by women, which is damaging their careers, which means that when it's a question of furloughing or redundancy or firing, it will be women that will suffer most. And this, I think, is a very important feature. So up to now, we've talked about some revealings, to use your word,
Mm-hmm.
such as male violence against women in all echelons, as you quite rightly say. And now this question of whether what advances there have been in the socioeconomic location of women are going to be turned back permanently. Let's be careful about this too, because I am a professor, so I'm an academic. I mean, in some ways, there haven't been as major advances in the world of gender as we would like to think, but there have been some. And I think there is a possibility that that's being turned back. But this is the negatives, and it's the necessary prelude to what I want to say about all the new stuff.
Right. So let's make that segue. But I think that last statement that you just made isn't a really critical one to understand, that it's not that it's necessarily being turned back, but the fact that we may not have made as much progress as we like to think relative to division of labor, relative to male violence,
it's
is
not
what's
either
being
or.
revealed by COVID.
So it's both, Loralee. I think we've always known academics, especially in men's studies, which is an academic discipline now, we've always known that the gender divide in terms of roles in the home has been pretty much permanent for a long time. But what I think we're seeing now is a rolling back, especially in the liberal democracies, of what changes there had been. But to repeat, and to say it for the third time, in some ways, what I'm talking about now is a recognition of the shit that is going on in homes now. But I also want to talk about the potential gold that is going on and could come on stream in the future. So I think we should shift to that.
We're shifting to that, but I think that was an important bus stop to take. So the next piece from here is, you have been in some of your writing, you've been critical of monogamy, the way it has been traditionally practiced. What do you think is happening to our notions of monogamy, and why are you critical of it?
I'm critical of anything monotheism, monogamy. monocular vision, mononucleosis, all of these things. I'm critical of these things because they cut us off from what makes us human, which is whatever the opposite of mono is. Poly, as Jim Hillman put it, pluralistic, as I put it. And I think that there are problems with monogamy that are specific to monogamy. Let me talk about this. The first person to spot it was Friedrich Engels. Now, I'm not a Marxian, but nobody in the psychosocial field can leave Marx and Engels out because they were profoundly psychological. To give one example, their studies of worker alienation are relevant today. But in regard to this, Engels said that marriage is a kind of property relationship. And he was talking, of course, the 19th century, but as we've just been saying, it hasn't gone away. Mm-hmm. So there is this question: how do we destabilize or rethink the ownership element? And of course, now it can go two ways. The man can own the woman can own the man, or they can own each other in a kind of cooperative, but the principle of ownership is there. Now you can dress this up, and it maybe isn't just a dressing up, and talk about fidelity, commitment, the long-term relationships, and all the things that most of us have been taught to value. But is there another way of looking at relationships that doesn't preach the virtues of fidelity? And this is what I've been talking about. Now, I want to be very careful here. I don't mind if you're faithful. I don't mind if you're married. I don't mind whatever sex you are in that marriage. But isn't it time to question, and maybe again, because maybe we questioned this in the 60s, in the sexual revolution, which of course wasn't one. You've got to find somebody to love, sang Jefferson Airplane. And here we are again. We are seeing a new old gender politics or sexual politics. And so what I wanted to say is that the awful atmosphere in lockdown homes is, of course, special to those lockdown homes, but it is also indicative of a particular kind of squashedness and oppression that is there in the institution of monogamy. Last point before I shut up and let you push back, as you so often do. Therapists who are supposed to be non-judgmental and open-minded are not when it comes to monogamy. How many case accounts have I read where the success of the work is trumpeted along the lines of, and after 17 years of analysis, she got married. And better still, had children. You see, these values, no matter what you think about them, and if you come from a traditional religious background, for example, you think highly of them, but these values are assumptions. They are part of the heteronormative set. And when we come to talk about promiscuity, I will sharpen this critique of therapists, and also when we come to talk about the therapeutic relationship. But for the moment, let me just say, I'm not saying monogamy sucks. I'm saying think about it a bit. Think about whether there isn't another side to monogamy, where it is still a property relation, a cultural assumption, rationalized by reference to the well-being of children. And quite frankly, children do very well in lone parent family homes, because most lone parent family homes have got rid of the dickhead who was the father, who did a lot of the violence in the first place. So you needn't think.
It's a good time for me to make a disclaimer about the views you're hearing here are not necessary.
Good, that's good to know. Anyway, I hope by now you see what I'm getting at. I'm not saying monogamy is evil. I'm not saying it's infectious. I'm not saying it will bring you down. I'm saying that I'm not so sure about it as the summit of relational process. That's what I'm saying. And I think COVID-19 is helping me to say it in a public setting, and specifically to say, because there are racial implications here,
Mhm.
the absence of a father may be a bloody good thing. Depends on the father.
Right.
And I remember seeing clips of Jesse Jackson not realizing that he had an open mic. I know I've got an open mic, Loralee. Jesse Jackson was referring to Barack Obama's much hailed exhortation to Black men to be better and more active and more present fathers, which really got up progressive civil rights people like Jesse Jackson's nose. And he says on the mic, "I'd like to tear his nuts off." Jackson wanted to tear Obama's nuts off for saying the conventional wisdom, bring back the father and all will be well. This is not the case. It's actually racist to think like that and talk like that. So that concludes my critique of monogamy. And by the way, I've done monogamy. Now, when I say that, it's wonderfully paradoxical, because you can't say I've done monogamy, because if you're really done monogamy, you've never done anything else. That's the whole point. Think about it. I can see a lot of people smiling, especially the women. I don't know why. Anyway, it's very strange, because I can see about 15 or 20 little boxes here, and I've never seen, in one of my Zooms, I've never seen so many people laugh. But make no mistake, if psychotherapy is to be progressive, it has to challenge conventional heteronormative wisdom, such as that the presence of the father is only good, the absence of the father is only bad. And I think COVID is opening a space for a deepening of that discussion.
All right, point made, and I think well taken, Andrew. So I'm not pushing back with you on this one because I think this topic, and a lot of these topics, by the way, I think in this conversation merit a much deeper exploration than what we're going to be able to.
Well, of course they do.
bring
I mean,
to-
I'm a specialist in superficiality in the sense that I say these things. But those of you who know me will know this is all written.
Right. So let me get to the next question.
It's all written, it's all researched. I have thought about it. It's not
Right.
just today's silly
Right.
old man
We will
comment.
be sharing, and we will be sharing with the group. For those of you who may not know, one of the places where you can access some of what Andrew has written to this is in his recent book, A New Therapy for Politics, which, segueing into that, you have a chapter in that book called Promiscuities, Politics, Psychology, Imagination, and Spirituality. And can you help us, understand where you talk about a connection in that chapter, and you make a statement, understanding the challenges to monogamy to be much deeper than promiscuity, and you actually relate promiscuity with spirituality.
Yes. Well, let's leave monogamy out for the moment. You've left off a very vital bit of the title of that chapter. It ends in parentheses, or as we say in England, brackets,
Oh,
and a note on hypocrisy.
you're right. I did. My apologies.
Did. No.
All right.
We are told by Sigmund that these slips are very important, Loralee.
Don't start analyzing this, Andrew.
Okay, promiscuity. If you look at dictionary definitions of promiscuity, you will basically see very little positive about it. Although some writers like to refer to themselves as promiscuous, meaning that they're drawing in things from lots of different sources, as like a person draws in lots of sex partners. But on the whole, promiscuous means confused, indiscriminate, unrelational, and above all, the phrase used is casual sex. Now, I want to tell you something. There is no such thing as casual sex. There are different kinds of sex with different kinds of feelings. And there is no such thing as sex outside some kind of a structure, even if the structure is, we don't have a structure, it's a zipless fuck, we're just going to do it once and never see each other again, it's just an expression of lust. These are not trivial comments.
Mhm.
These are very important. They are, in their own way, as important, perhaps, as people who say we've been together for 40 years and the sexual connection still flourishes and gets better and better, and we have never strayed. Or if we have, like Jimmy Carter, it's all been in our hearts or souls, but we've never actually done it. So promiscuity is represented as casual, indiscriminate, mixed up, a male game, which of course it isn't. I mean, maybe more men have in the history of time been promiscuous than more women, but my goodness me, I don't think that we can let that go. In fact, I think it's part of female progress to be promiscuous. And so unrelated sex, which was pioneered by gay men, as so many things in the world of relationships were. Serial monogamy was a gay male invention. Unrelated sex was a gay male invention. And so many things to do with the world of relationships come from that, which people don't want to recognize. You only have to read any of the central texts in gay and lesbian studies to see that what I'm saying is an academic, conventional thing to say. So there's a lot of interesting and good stuff in promiscuity. But moving on, do you want me to talk about the spiritual thing?
Yeah, I'm just watching the clock. So briefly, because we're about halfway through our questions and we've got about 20 minutes left. So,
Well, I think all we need to do is to talk about promiscuity as a spiritual matter and then do the Jungian piece and then we're out.
okay.
That's fine with me. You and I talk too much.
Andrew, you're
Well,
the one doing most of the talking in this conversation.
yeah, I know. So you've cued me into spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy called Robert Zahner a long time ago who coined the term profane spirituality. He meant sex. I think it has to do with sex, drugs, drink, rock and roll, soccer, popular culture generally. These things have a spiritual charge. They take us either up or down, depending on how you look at these things, but they take us out of the everyday. Now, at the heart of profane spirituality when it comes to sex is lust. When I do workshops on this, I ask people to think about their experiences of lust when they were possessed by a sexual drive. My friend, the psychoanalyst Muriel Dimon, said, don't forget, sex is a drive. It's not just a relation.
Mm.
So sex as a drive is at the heart of the notion of lust. Even Jungian analysts have experienced lust. And in my workshop, I say, if you haven't experienced lust, how do you feel about that? Very few people have never experienced it. It is a taboo emotion. Verena Kast wrote a book about the forbidden emotions in psychology, and they were the positive ones, like hope. But lust as an emotion is not sufficiently discussed. And so I'd like people to think about their experiences of lust. What did you do? How long ago was it? Because a lot of people say, oh, I had lust when I was 17. Bullshit.
Okay. And all right, let's move on. We're going to leave that there for people to sit with, and I'm sure comment on when we get to the question. So moving forward with this, I think most everyone on here is very familiar with the fact that Jung in his time blazed a proverbial trail with his articulation of anima and animus when he came out the door with that. However, those very terms continue to be problematic themes for post-Jungians when they're used in an essentialist way. What do you propose as an alternative moving forward when we're talking about this anima animus and moving that forward in a way that can incorporate these multivalent relationships?
Well, Jung knew a lot about lust and acting on it. He knew a lot about promiscuity. Although the topic today is not polyamory, I would say the triangle of Emma Jung, Tony Wolff, and Carl Gustav Jung is polyamorous. The problem with it is that one has to ask, was Jung the only beneficiary? Well, certainly Tony Wolff benefited. Emma Jung actually said she did. She thanked Tony Wolff for saving Jung and for doing something for him that she couldn't do. Now, whether what she meant was that Tony Wolff helped him from going mad, or whether she meant that Tony Wolff gave him blowjobs, I don't know. But I suspect it's both. So that all three of them got something out of it. This sexual revolution stuff is often smeared as a game for boys. It's not. It may be more for men and boys, but it's not only for men and boys. Sorry, am I really being awful putting the word Jung and the word blowjob in the same sentence? I don't think so.
You're being classic Andrew Samuels, and I'm sure I'm going to hear the kickback from it, but here we are, Andrew.
So Jung opens up a lot in the area of promiscuity. Now, with regard to animus and anima, we don't have time to say very much, but I think people who are writing about non-binary gender identity really do need to read Jung on animus and anima, because they are, well, they're not exactly non-binary because there's animus and anima and so forth, but there are men and women, so it's not surprising that there is a binary element. But when it comes to current thinking about what non-binary means, I think animus and anima is a core text or schema to look into it. And also, by the way, in relation to trans as well. Jung, we don't have time to do it thoroughly, but Jung's writings are so interesting when you have either trans in mind or non-binary in mind. It's really important. And maybe I need to say, it's in these days, in these viral days, the self is not as important as animus and anima, a point Jim Hillman made in another historical context. The issue here is about non-binary and trans.
So if I'm understanding you, you're talking about using animus and anima as kind of a psychological motif, but degenderizing them, correct?
No, let's not get into it, because it's not quite it. It's a text. They are not things. It's a way of thinking, okay? And in terms of therapy, which we really should talk about before we stop, we will, I mean, next. In terms of therapy, these are ways of thinking, ways of perceiving, ways of being. None of this exists concretely.
Right.
And even the modern playing around that lots of people, including me, have done, I think Ursula's done it and Verena has done it, and to say there's animus and anima in everyone, that's not the point here. The point is to enter that unstable, insecure, shifting world of gender and sexual behaviors and identities, which I'm not saying all therapists, but the majority of therapists are ill at ease within. So perhaps it is time to talk about therapists.
Well, I mean, we can jump to that question. And yeah, when I'm talking about working with them, you're saying don't throw the baby out with the bathwater with the animus anima, and not understanding it as a psychological orientation, but it's still something.
Oh, I never worry about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because there'll always be defenders of the traditional positions.
Right.
In other words, the Jungian world does not have to worry about anything that is said against these core Jungian ideas,
Right.
because there are millions of you who will take care of them. So I'm not worried about the baby.
Okay, you're sailing towards the margins. Let's jump, because I'm looking at time. So let's jump to the therapeutic part. So I'm going to jump over a couple of our questions, and if you want to go back, we can. But let's talk about how COVID has impacted the therapeutic relationship, starting with teletherapy. Yeah. Everyone's on Zoom.
Yeah, everyone's on Zoom. And too many people are self-congratulating about how they're on Zoom at top of a mountain 600 miles from New York City, but that's another story. The display of wealth, not meant, but actually quite clear by psychoanalysts and Jungian analysts, as they get out of the hellholes that virtually nobody else can get out of and continue to work full time as virtually nobody else can do, this needs to be condemned. Actually, there's one chap who said, my wife and I have gone to our home in the Baltic, part of Germany, the old East Germany. And he said we had to hide our cars because the local people resented the rich interlopers coming in full time. And you can, in England, you can hear this from Wales and the Southwest, East Anglia. Those of you who are British will know what I'm talking about. Second homes, awful. Okay, end of rant. Mm-hmm. Or rather, the beginning of a second rant. Mm-hmm. Thank God we have at last the cultural context for equality, not just mutuality, in the therapy relationship. Equality has always been condemned. Everybody said, well, there's a professional and there's a client. True. And people say things like it's asymmetrically mutual, meaning it isn't mutual. It's asymmetric. Actually, what's becoming clear is that people are linked. The therapy pair are linked by what's happening in the society. Were they always thus? Yes, actually, they always were. And just as when people were linked by being citizens before the virus, they're linked by being citizens now, but it doesn't mean they're the same. But it doesn't mean that the distinction is that one is the professional and one is the paying client or customer. The distinction is that people's experience of society differs from one another's. If you're Jewish, if you're Black, if your family was rich or poor, if you're biracial, all of this means that you have to be very careful to say we're just linked by being in a global crisis. We're linked by being in a global crisis, but we are in the global crisis in our own ways. So this is the first thing that I think is important for therapy. The second thing, and again, this is really where COVID is bringing out something and licensing something. It has to do with the activity on the part of the client or patient. Now, those people who research therapy outcomes have been saying and being ignored for decades. The key thing is not the relationship. I mean, we know it's not the school of the therapy. Okay, therapists, that really doesn't make any difference. But people in the game say, well, it's the relationship. No, the thing that makes things happen is the client or patient, where they are on what John Norcross, the great researcher in this matter, calls their trajectory of change. So it's your client who owns the therapy in a very meaningful way. And this is becoming clearer and clearer as the length of time doing it remotely and within an ever spiraling virus, because this is only just beginning. Wait till the winter in Europe. It's going to be awful. So this question of the activity of the client needs to be added to what I've just said about a certain kind of ineluctable equality, but it's equality nuanced by the social history and background and current location of the analyst or the therapist and the patient or the client. Now, maybe this is too much to take in, but I suspect most people here have an idea about whether that there's a debate about how equal therapist and client are. I think most people here have an idea that there is an interesting discussion going on about who does what. And what I'm saying is that what COVID is showing is that researchers like John Norcross, who I mentioned, Michael Lambert, Bruce Wampold, and others, they're all men, interestingly, are stressing the activity of the client. The reason why there are so few women researchers into therapeutic outcome is that women are quite rightly much less interested in outcomes. There's much.
Oh, Andrew, you don't want to lob that statement across the
Yeah, but
fence.
do you understand what I'm saying? The reason men are into this is they want statistics. They want to say that there will be a percentage improvement.
Yeah, I agree with you. But look at the work of Carol Gilligan. She's done longitudinal studies for decades with statistics, and
No, it's a
you
completely
could say
different
men
point.
don't want to pay attention to those. I mean, you got
I
to be
think
careful.
I know Carol Gilligan quite well. I'm
Mhm.
sure she'd absolutely understand when all her work on the different moral and ethical outlooks of men and women would underpin what I'm saying. Male researchers want the bottom line. They want the money shot. That is the client getting better in a specific period of time? They're not so process oriented.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
no, I know what you're saying, and I'm not, I mean, I'm pushing back, but I would say I don't think you can link it to gender. I think you can probably link that more to typology, whether it's a thinking dominant or
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be typological as well.
yeah, I think it's more
Um,
typologically linked than gender. And there is
well,
a gender divide relative to the thinking, feeling.
yeah, but let's not forget first of all, that was a diversion. I just
Mhm,
clocked the names. I was analyzing myself. I
mhm,
mentioned John, Michael, Bruce,
mhm,
and I thought, how interesting. I'd never realized because I read these people. I'm not interested in outcome studies, but
mhm.
I am interested in what they have located as the nexus of something in therapy, which is the client.
Right.
And that's what I'm really talking about.
Yeah,
And I think
I think
that is,
you're, yeah, I think your shift in your work and what you're bringing out here relative to the equality within the therapeutic, and also not only the equality, but the sense that what matters is the client's trajectory, and that the therapist is understanding that, tracking that, following that, work.
no, this is absolutely not what I'm saying. The therapist is irrelevant. The therapist is just there. The therapist isn't tracking. The therapist isn't reflecting or echoing or monitoring. Forget the therapist.
Right, but the client couldn't
Forget,
get there if there wasn't another body in the room.
yes, that's true. But forget the therapist and forget the therapeutic relationship. Try to imagine, try to isolate this unique factor, which is what the individual we call the client or the patient contributes by their activity. And one of the great difficulties when you're supervising people is that you can see how this, and I'm sure I do this too. I'm sure I go against everything I believe in. You can see how the therapist, by their activity, closes down the activity of the
Mm.
client. The key writer on this, another man, is Arthur Bohart. But I have to say, he's a person-centered guy. But there are lots of female relational psychoanalysts who would and have resonated with what I am saying. Jodie Davies,
Mhm.
Muriel Dimon, who I mentioned, who's died, Jessica Benjamin, Lynn Layton. I mean, these are not Jungians, but
Right.
they have grasped that the therapy world has elevated the relationship in a way that might, without meaning to,
Mhm.
knock out the client. And the key phrase in Britain is the therapeutic alliance.
Mhm.
You see, the therapeutic alliance forces the client into a value-laden framework.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
there's an
saying. And
implied, there's an
is
implied
it
hierarchy.
shocking?
Yeah.
Is it shocking? And should you stay away from me as a potential therapist? Well, if it is, I'm sorry, but my job in 1 hour is to bring out certain things that are being highlighted by COVID. And so, I mean, I'm actually done with the therapy side, and I think we should hang it, hand it to
For
to
questions?
discussion.
Hmm. Comments? Okay, so let's open it up. And this has been a um, fast moving, as they all have been, conversation. So let's open it up for those of you that are on with us on the chat bar. I know there's been conversation while this has been going on. So Andrew, can you see the chat bar?
No, part of being both superficial and poly is that I can read the chat bar and speak at the same time. And quite a lot of the diversions that I get into, which must infuriate you, are because of what I'm reading. There's someone called Tara Bliss. She was very surprised to hear the discussion of non-monogamy as a developmental failure. I'm a 30-year-old non-monogamist. Yes. Well, I didn't really mean to say that there are no therapists out there, no clients out there who are living poly lives, who are exploring what is meant by promiscuity, who have read the wonderful book, The Ethical Slut, or Catherine Millett's book on her promiscuous experiences in the publishing and arts world in Paris. You're quite right. Okay, Tara, if this didn't fit you, apologies. But make no mistake, I've been around a long time. What I'm saying, what I'm attacking, fits a lot of therapists. Monogamy is considered the developmental pinnacle. Promiscuity is a problem to be managed. That is the basic default position of many therapists and counselors. Let's move on. Why use the lens, says Elspeth Crawford, who's put good things up here before. Why use the lens of ownership? What about specificity? I'm not completely sure I understand the question, but the notion that monogamy is characterized by ownership is not mine. And it's not just Engels. Feminist thinking has certainly taught us that what controls the woman is some sort of notion of ownership. Some might find Sheila McNamee's piece of interest here, Promiscuity in the Practice of Family Therapy. That's a very interesting, Scott, whoever Scott is. The one audience that has found what I'm saying a little bit conventional are sex and relationship therapists, because they're dealing with this all the time. And they know very well that the binary between monogamy and promiscuity and the hierarchy, the ethical and civic hierarchy that is applied. And I'm not saying they disagree with it, they just say it doesn't exist. And I think Jimmy Carter, who I mentioned earlier, when he said he lusted, I think it was a Playboy interview in the 70s, he said he lusted after women in his soul. Dead right. And I believe women lust after men, all women actually, in their souls. The Lord and Master Law, Nancy Harding brings in, was only repealed in 1979. It is archetypal, and the manifestations of the transmigration of generational traumatic issues is alive and well here, except for one thing: they are now being made conscious. I agree with you. Elspeth again, the asymmetry in a therapy relationship is that each person relating as they can and bringing the society and are both addressing their attention to just one of them. This is a direction that is not equal in for. No, this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. All the developments in the use of self by the therapist, the so-called countertransference revolution, means that some therapists spend far more time tracking their own bodily reactions, fantasies, dreams, and parallel experiences than thinking about the goddamn client at all. So anyway, that's my point. Can you expand on the patient's activity? Yes, I can. And I think I've got to, because that's the last question just about, which means either I've totally failed to communicate or I've just silenced you all. Come on. The notion of the active patient is a kind of a political approach to therapy. It's a kind of democratic approach to therapy. And it goes against the idea that there is no equality. So the active patient not only determines the agenda, but drives the whole shish kebab. And the therapist needs to recognize that. Doesn't mean the therapist is irrelevant, but the notion of the active client, and I've developed this in the direction of what I call the activist client, because I think a lot of active clients want to bring politics in, and the typical well-trained analytical therapist doesn't know what to do. So I think there is a connection between the active client and the activist client. Can you speak to animus as complex and archetype? Oh, bloody hell. I just don't think like that anymore. I really don't. I mean, I think I once wrote a piece for The Guardian on Jung as the psychologist for the 21st century. And this is what I made the center of it, was animus and anima, because The Guardian is terribly interested in sex roles. I mean, just obsessed with it. So I thought it was a good thing to do. But what becomes clear if you think about animus and anima is that people are released to be something other. Animus and anima are not contrasexual. They're just contra-personality. That's why I say that the image, the muse that inspires me most, and whose picture I have on the wall of my office and of my bedroom, is the British Olympic and world boxing champion, Nicola Adams. She's a black British person. It doesn't matter, but she has degrees and a law degree and things like this, and is very active now in social issues. But for me, female aggression and female achievement in the world of physicality is really important. And I think it's, anyway, but it's not quite about relationships, that bit, but it's very, very important to me. Just as, by the way, nurturing fathers are. Mm-hmm. Fathers who produce milk. You know, Loralee, you probably, in your workshops, I imagine you have this question of how do men nurture? Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in how women fight.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, Andrew, look, I think where you're going with so much of this material and what COVID is intensifying, I mean, what's going on, even though this is a political series, it's much deeper. We're really wrestling right now with the meta narratives that have historically been accepted as normative. That's what you're talking about. You're imploding a lot of those in this conversation. And I think, you know, there's still a lot more work to be done relative to that, especially in this area.
There are some more questions, but let me play with my anxieties. Now, my main anxiety is that some of you are thinking, so what's new? Of course, women punch. Of course, women betray their men. And women betray their women too, of course. So what's new? I think what's the bits that are worth thinking about are the critique of monogamy and the reframing of promiscuity, particularly as a spiritual thing. One guy, Robert Gose, wrote, behind non-monogamous relating, we find the presence of a promiscuous God who loves indiscriminately. When I read that, I felt thumped in the chest, because I had been writing about profane spirituality for 30 years. But my writing on spirituality never mentions God at all. So a God that loves everybody and everything, including, as the New Testament says, sparrows. That's a promiscuous God. And what I liked about what gay writers on spirituality bring to the table is that they reverse the hierarchy, where even if you don't condemn promiscuity, monogamy is higher. This chap and others like him are putting promiscuity higher than monogamy. It's very thought provoking. Leo Bassani, Google him. He wrote a paper in the 80s called "Is the Rectum a grave is the rectum a grave. Of course, it was at the height of HIV/AIDS. And at that time, people thought AIDS was just for gay men. Now, of course, we know differently. And in it, he said the great achievement of gay thinking and behavior was to understand the importance of promiscuity. Now, he wasn't saying never have a fixed boyfriend. What he was saying is, don't only praise yourself and others for having a fixed boyfriend. You can praise yourself and others for fucking the world. It's just as good. And this is a very shocking thing to say, but I think that's what's becoming fairly clear. Maybe COVID is only slightly pushing it along. It's around. It is around. The kids know it. I mean, for goodness sake, never mind Grindr. There's Tinder and there's Bumble. And my younger clients tell me there are millions of these apps where it's absolutely fine. The only thing that interests me, what promiscuity is fine, is whether they see it as a phase and they're going to settle down. Do they have to settle down? I don't know. You know, in The Guardian today, there's an article about how many younger people are saying they never want to have children. So how are they going to live? They're probably going to live with friends. And if they're living with friends, the marital bit, the monogamous bit, will be with the friends. That the sexual and romantic bit will be outside the apartment where four people live together, so to speak.
Andrew, you've got a question on here. I don't know if you saw it, from Dr. Ava Lindberg.
Yeah, but this session is significant and provocative for further study. That one. That's nice. But
no, farther down. What happens when in a marriage, one partner arrives to the counseling therapy deeply wanting, you see it?
One partner wants polyamory, the other one wants monogamy. I personally believe in poly relationships, and so sometimes do not relate to the monogamous partner in an equal way. Well, you should try to relate to them in an equal way, got to say that. But your personal predilections and experiences will also determine it. Look, the main critique of polyamory and of promiscuity is that people get hurt. They get jealous. They get confused. Unlike monogamy, where nobody gets jealous and everybody's fine all the time, human life is just shit. There's no way round it. But the idea of positioning monogamy as a safe place that encourages psychological growth and respect for the other and so on. And promiscuity is the opposite. That's what I'm really challenging. In relationships, you suffer. I mean, you don't just suffer, but you do suffer, and you get hurt and you get jealous. And this is going on even in marriages sanctified by law or by God. Why didn't God invent us as satisfied with one person? Why did it have to become an edict? Why did it have to become something that institutions pushed? Now, you can give lots of sociological answers to that question, but I do think it's an interesting one to think about psychologically. We're not built mono. You've got 2 minutes. Oh, yes, there was a question that I remembered and wanted to, because it touches on some of our arguments and some of the points I made about why men study outcomes and maybe women study process. I don't know when it comes to therapy research. Somebody has pointed out how few men there are on this webinar. And in fact, looking at this screen, well, I can't get the chat thing out of the way. I've got 1, 2, 5. I've got 30 people on the screen, and there are 1, 2, 3 men. Now,
Sammy wants you to know he's a man. Hi, Sammy. Thanks for letting us know that he's weighing in.
yes, but you don't know what I'm looking at. So
Mhm.
I may not have missed you. I'm just looking
Mhm.
at what I'm looking at. Okay, four out of 30. I've done a lot of research on the question of why men become therapists. And I really do know quite a lot about this. And I know the statistics that between 75 and 80% of all therapists, counselors, clinical psychologists, whatever you want, across the world are women. Of course, the usual problems come in that presidents and chairpersons and the top people, executive directors are often men, but if we don't need to
Thank
go
you.
into
That's
that.
another series, Andrew.
Yeah, we know about that. But the
No, we don't
important,
know enough about that, Andrew, but okay.
well, I don't know whether we do or we don't, yeah, you're right. We don't know enough about it. I take that back. You're right. However, what I'm saying is that there's a very interesting question which is not much discussed. I've done millions of workshops now, especially with men on their experience of therapy training and how hard they find it,
Mm.
and how many of them feel feminized by choosing the profession of therapist. 50% of psychiatrists are men. So being a doctor is okay, but being a therapist isn't on the whole if you're a man. So I think it's a very good question. It may reflect your organization, it may not. The Jungian world is heavily, more men have appeared. How weird. How weird. As we're talking, the thing moved and 3 more men have come.
It's the
And
gods,
I
Andrew.
can see
It's the
Liz
gods.
Broderson. Liz, I can see you laughing. That's so brilliant, the way the technology and the thinking interact. Can I just summarize? This
Please.
was supposed to be, and indeed to some extent was, about problems with monogamy, non-binary, which we didn't do enough on,
Mm-hmm.
profane spirituality and promiscuity, which we did too much on, and about how ideas on the therapy relationship are evolving, all of it in the context of COVID-19 and a pandemic in the West. Okay? This isn't true in South Africa. It is not true in Uganda. It is true in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's very important to make this point, but I think we should just say what we're planning to do next month.
Okay. Well, Andrew, thank you. And thank you to all of you who have, I mean, there's many of you on from all around the world who've been on this. I think this conversation, Andrew, was, for me anyway, was you were taking us most beyond the edges of the map and really challenging.
No. The main worry about my talk is that there are people here for whom it's passé, old hat, they know it. But my question to them is, can they say it?
Right. That's what I'm talking about. When I say taking us beyond the end of the edges of the map, it's articulating it. It's putting it out there. It's, it's taking the elephant in the room and talking about it. So thank you for the scholarship that you bring. Let me give you a compliment, Andrew. Okay. So thank you for the scholarship that you bring into this conversation and the ways in which you're encouraging individuals.
Yeah, but Loralee, what are we doing next time? Isn't that
So here's what we're doing next time. So, Andrew, I'm driving the car right now, okay? Sit in the passenger seat for a second. Okay, let me drive this bit. Drink your tea and let me drive this bit. So thank you, everyone, for this wonderful session. We will be coming back August 22nd. It's another Saturday, August 22nd, and you will get an email for, I think, Andrew, what you were calling it is a farewell and a wrapping up. And it's going to be entirely devoted to questions, things that you would like to ask Andrew about relative to this entire series. So
may I say,
yes,
I'm hoping, because the numbers have dropped a bit, about 80 or something, I would like us, you and me, to discuss unmuting the mics.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody figuring out or being told how 80 people can do a Zoom unmuted. I think that would be a good idea.
I'm sure you think that'd be a good idea because that's landing on my table to manage technologically, Andrew. Okay, we will try. I will make this commitment to Andrew's on-air challenge. We'll try to unmute
the
my
article in the Guardian is called something like "Is the 21st Century Jung's?" Google Guardian, Andrew Samuels. There'll be a lot of stuff there. And this is the 21st Century Jung, something like that. And thank you for the nice things that are coming in, which I will not read out. That's really, gosh. Okay, good, great.
All right. So everyone, thank you again. You can join Andrew and I next month, Saturday, August 22nd. We will give it a shot at actually letting that be a conversation where you'll have the capability to unmute your mic and speak to Andrew directly, ask questions
to each other. And to each other.
So thank you. There's a large number of people. There's over 400 people in this series, but we'll see how many show up next month. So thank you again. Andrew, thank you as always for your generosity, your scholarship, and where you go with this. Thanks
for the questions. Great. Bye.
Take care. Take care all.